Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizenghausen. June 22nd. Here are the main news stories at this moment. The authorities of occupied Crimea are doing everything they can to reassure guests and residents of the peninsula. To put it mildly, it's not really working. In fact, the more they try to calm people down, the more panic grows in Crimea. Now, it's not just those who came to Crimea for vacation who are fleeing. As for them, honestly, I have no questions. That's for specialists to diagnose. But now even the residents of the peninsula are fleeing. They clearly understand that right now there's no gasoline, and in some places there's already no electricity or water. And this is just the beginning. Many are starting to realize that soon it will be absolutely impossible to deliver anything to Crimea, not just fuel. And here are the latest news from Crimea, literally from the past 24 hours. The curfew is being imposed in Crimea. Fuel will not be sold in the near future, at all. These are all official statements. Ferries and the ferry crossing are not operating and will not be operating in the near future, because literally a day ago, the GUR and SBU burned the car ferries that were used to transport not only fuel, but also food to the occupied Crimea. Shopping malls and supermarkets must close at 8 o'clock p.m. Street lighting will not be turned on due to the electricity shortage. At the same time, I remind you, every day the armed forces of Ukraine strike bridges and crossings leading to Crimea. Because of this, the Russian group has started having problems not only with logistics, not only on the peninsula, but also in the occupied parts of Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. And today I came across a video of some Russian woman who is trying to leave Crimea, and here's what she tells us. The bridges and land corridors out of Crimea are closed. More than 1,000 people have gathered at the train station. I understand this is in Simferopol. Buses haven't arrived for hours. Passengers who were planning to leave Crimea have been waiting since yesterday. The authorities have imposed a curfew and are asking people not to go outside unless necessary. In general, the occupiers are also complaining that it's impossible to withdraw cash. Most ATMs are not working. Plus, of course, there are problems with electricity. You know, I get the feeling that when Crimea runs out of fuel, electricity, water, and internet, when the occupiers scatter and our Crimea is being left by the last occupier with tears in his eyes, he'll stop by the Kerch Bridge, turn around, look at our Crimea, raise his eyes to the sky and ask, "But why, why?" And right at that moment, stones will start falling from the sky onto his foolish head. So he won't ask stupid questions. It's practically a ready-made script for a short film, you know? By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It's important, and you can do it right now. It helps promote the channel. We are fighting against Putin's propaganda, and it's much more effective to do it together. So make sure to subscribe, and don't forget, as soon as you subscribe to this channel, your hair will instantly become soft and silky. Not just about Crimea. The armed forces of Ukraine launched a missile strike on Voronezh. A semiconductor device manufacturing plant was attacked. The plant is simply called Sborka, assembly. It has a slightly more complicated name, but we'll just call it Sborka for simplicity. Sborka. The strike was carried out with cruise missiles. Russians are saying that these were Storm Shadow missiles. They were, well, we'll find out soon. At the very least, there were definitely missiles. This is one of the most important plants for the Russian military-industrial complex. This enterprise produced electronic components for Kach-101 cruise missiles, which the Russians used to strike Ukraine, for Iskander-K and Kalibr missile systems, for S-400 air defense systems, and for Pantsir anti-aircraft systems. In short, it's an important enterprise. I have an excellent video. I'm not even sure what's better. The view of this burning plant, which was hit by missiles from several sides, or the commentary in the background. Please take a look.
У нас тут вкусняшка происходит, смотри. Там скорее, это, короче, завод, где мой раньше брат работал. Там вот видно пожар, дымы всякие. Фу. Обвалилась кровля. Короче, беспилотники не сбили. Это плохо. Вот. Это завод, где раньше мой брат работал. Раньше. Там вот, короче, вот там вот. Ой, вот там вот, короче, пожар видно. И тут вот видно.
Well, there will be even more beautiful videos. Lately, I've gotten the impression that Russians themselves are happy when their plants or oil refineries get hit. The woman in the background, I think you heard her, she says this is the plant where her brother used to work. Well, apparently he doesn't work there anymore. According to updated information, one of the buildings has completely collapsed. I'll show you the video now. Honestly, I'm exhausted today from having to bleep out all these videos, all these Russian foul-mouthed people. Take a look.
Вот, короче, даже просто в том, что он обломал крышу на несколько этажей, который все горит, полыхает.
What's interesting is that the strike hit both sides of the building, and it collapsed inward. In other words, it was a precision job. Once again, I repeat for Russians, do you have relatives or close ones working at similar plants? If you do, just know that soon, most likely to be precise, they won't be working at such plants for much longer. When Ukrainian ballistic missiles come into play, everything will speed up even more. But that's not all. Following our drones, we moved to the Moscow region, to the Space Communication Center in the city of Dubna, Moscow Oblast, where our drones arrived today. In short, it's a critically important facility. Simply put, it's a hub through which government communication channels pass, data is transmitted via Russian satellites, there are backup channels for various agencies, and part of the satellite infrastructure is managed from here, so it's a pretty juicy target. Russia has several major space communication centers, and Dubna is considered one of the key hubs, specifically in the European part of the Russian Federation. And it's also the largest facility of its kind. So if you hit something like this, you really hit the mark. We're waiting for some impressive footage. Apparently, the Russians have learned how to film, so keep it up, Russians. And what Ukraine and Ukrainian defenders are doing right now is simply incredible. It's a true feat. In every episode, we have an important fundraiser for the defense forces of Ukraine. Today, we continue raising funds for the soldiers of the 1st Artillery Battery of the Artillery Division of the 101st Separate Brigade. The fundraiser is for a vehicle. We've already covered more than half of the fundraising goal, and our artillerymen from the 101st Brigade are hitting the enemy so hard, they definitely won't forget it. But they still need our help, so let's get involved. Let's help our artillerymen. They're fighting in one of the hottest spots, Kostiantinivka, Drushkivka. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video. There are options for Mono, Private, and PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. QR code. There's also one in the corner in case you're watching me on other channels. Our soldiers, the artillerymen, are very modest, but they know their job. Let's help them. And thank you so much to everyone who supports Ukraine and our defenders. Let me also remind you that 2 days ago, Volodymyr Zelenskyy gave Lukashenko a 1-week ultimatum to dismantle the relay stations that help Russian drones attack Ukrainian territory. Moreover, Zelenskyy repeated this ultimatum yesterday. If you don't remove the relay stations, Lukashenko, we will do it ourselves. And he named a specific number, 4 units. So their locations are also known. And there's another important part of the quote. Let him remove them and show us that they have been dismantled. Lukashenko has 5 days left. The clock is ticking. And Kolya's dad is starting to feel the heat. In response, Minsk has sharply intensified its information campaign. That is, Lukashenko himself, his defense minister, and the secretary of the Security Council, they all literally started saying in unison that Belarus is in no way participating in the war, does not want to participate, and will not allow itself to be drawn into any conflict. But you are already participating, and you have already been drawn in. I think, of course, they understood the seriousness of Ukraine's intentions. So what way out is there for Lukashenko? To remove them? To be publicly shamed. So not remove them then? The consequences could be much more serious. In other words, Ukraine hasn't been joking for a long time now. I think the expired Dranicki will do the following. He'll remove the relays and will still try to squeeze out some bonuses for himself. Through back channels, he'll contact the Ukrainian leadership and say, I've removed them, but let's not make this public. Let's not advertise all of this. Threatening with Hazel or nuclear weapons would cost him more, so I think that's more or less what he'll do. But Lukashenko needs to talk to Putin about this either today or tomorrow, so I think it's finally gotten through to him. Before he could act cocky, let's be honest, because Moscow was backing him, literally Moscow. And now Moscow is still behind him, but this Moscow is already burning from Ukrainian drones, literally burning. It's a completely different Moscow now, you have to agree. And last night they hit the Port Kavkaz again just to make sure. In one of the programs, I mentioned that Crimea has always been a trap for those who tried to defend it. Always. Maybe Putin knew this from history. After all, he likes to study things from the Pechenegs, the Polovtsians, and so on. But this underground conqueror never thought he would have to defend Crimea himself. He couldn't even imagine that such a situation could arise. He couldn't have imagined such a thing even in his worst nightmare. Remember the rhetoric of the Russians just a year ago. No one was saying anything at all about Crimea back then. It was all, give up all 4 regions completely or else we'll take 6. Do you remember that rhetoric? See, as it turned out, Crimea became a thorn in Putin's side. First, a third of the Black Sea Fleet was destroyed there along with its flagship, and the remnants fled to Novorossiysk. And now, the occupied Crimea has become a colossal problem for the Russian Federation as a whole. Paradoxically, Crimea will end up devouring the Russian Federation itself. That's how it turns out. Crimea is like a weight dragging down a skinny, bony ankle. This bald abomination is being dragged to the bottom. And this is only the beginning. On one hand, Crimea is being cut off from logistics. On the other, Moscow and St. Petersburg are burning. Ukrainian drones are now reaching 2,000 kilometers deep into the Russian Federation. Yesterday, I think, Zelenskyy said that now we will start using drones that can fly 3,000 kilometers. Help, where should we put out the fire first? Well, what else is left? For Putin to carry out mobilization. Very risky. Maybe after the elections, right now there are some trial runs. They're not going very well for him. Risky, very risky. Threaten with nukes again? That's exactly why just the other day they let another madman loose. It seems things are really bad in the Russian Federation. So they released this Karaganov, the court political scientist, who for the 100th time is saying that Russia will launch nuclear strikes on Europe. Supposedly it's a great sin. But Russia has no other choice. And these videos where he says we'll strike yes soon, yes in a year, in half a year, these videos have been cut into thousands of clips. They've been spread on social media in different languages with translations and are being promoted. They're spending quite substantial budgets on this. So they're still trying to scare Europe, but it seems to me that no one is really afraid anymore. It's no secret that the worse things are going for Putin, the more nuclear threats we hear. And here's an interesting point. Putin has not succeeded, and apparently will no longer succeed, in intimidating Europe into stopping its support for Ukraine. Europe has already made this turn towards joint weapons production with Ukraine, the transfer of licenses, and the joint production of strike systems with Ukraine. Yes, a turn. This took quite a long time, but now the cart has been put on the rails, and it's rushing forward, only picking up speed. Russia can no longer do anything about it. It's clear, and that's why we hear such hysterical threats. Go ahead, release that micro-kraken of yours, let Medvedev once again threaten Europe, spitting ethyl saliva. It's been a while since we've heard any nuclear threats from him. And a bit more about Crimea. They're hardly even hiding the catastrophe anymore. Summer camps, sanatoriums, and tourist bases in Crimea are stopping bookings and no longer accepting children. This was reported today by the authorities of the occupied Crimea. Children are being evacuated from Crimea, and those who haven't yet left for their sessions have been warned not to go. In fact, this is an official admission that everything is out of control. And here you go, look, Arctic Camp has cancelled children's arrivals. Parents are in a panic, buses are being turned back to Kerch without explanation, children are spending the night in various boarding schools, colleges, wherever they can be accommodated. Sessions are being cancelled. And I have a question for those who are sending their children to Crimea right now. Some people must be out of their minds. I've seen the explanation that supposedly only there are vouchers available, so what else can you do? Well, you can't just let the vouchers go to waste, right? So instead you let your children go missing, is that it? But really, how out of your mind do you have to be for that? If you don't value your own life, at least have some pity for your children. Maybe they'll get a chance to live in a normal country when the Baldy finally croaks. Today, the leader of the Russian communists, Gennady Zyuganov, made a remarkable statement. All the money should be given to the state so that it can be put to work. Just to be clear, it's not Zyuganov's money, not the Communist Party's money, but the money of Russian citizens and the money of Russian businesses. According to Zyuganov, Russian Federation citizens have 67 trillion rubles in deposits and businesses have 63 trillion rubles in deposits. In Zyuganov's opinion, this money is just sitting in banks and not working for the economy. If this money is taken for the benefit of the state, then all the holes in the budget could be filled, Zyuganov said. Listen, he also suggested something like a smart withdrawal. Basically, first of all, Zyuganov apparently has absolutely no idea how banks work if he thinks that this money is just sitting there in the banks. But that's not what I'm talking about. After statements like these, Let's take Russian citizens' deposits and let them work for the state. After such statements, Russians will rush even faster to withdraw their deposits. And there's already a record outflow of deposits happening. So, the championship of old crackpots to see who can do the most crazy things in Russia continues. Zyuganov, he's slowly pulling ahead. Well, of course, everyone is still far behind Putin. But in Russia, everything is as stable as ever. It's just that as soon as the orderlies turned their backs, representatives of the Russian Foreign Ministry scattered from their wards and started making statements. So the Russian Foreign Ministry has accused NATO of developing a new Barbarossa Plan to attack Russia. NATO and the European Union, it turns out, if you didn't know, are preparing for a military confrontation with Russia around the year 2030. And their preparations are increasingly reminiscent of the Barbarossa Plan, the strategy Nazi Germany used to attack the USSR, according to Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Grushko. And let me remind you that earlier Lavrov warned that European countries are seeking a swift ceasefire in Ukraine. And why do you think that is? So they can deploy their military contingents on Ukrainian territory. That's their real goal, to end the fighting as quickly as possible so they can bring in NATO contingents. Yeah, we've been begging them for years to bring at least someone in here. They don't want to accept us into NATO. What contingents? Lavrov continued, saying that a united Europe also intends to take over Ukraine and Moldova and is drawing Armenia into its orbit, Lavrov adds. At the same time, he emphasized this is important, that Ukraine is being considered as the strike force of the future European armed forces. You know, it's logical to assume, probably, that if Europe wanted to attack Russia and considered Ukraine as its strike force, then Ukraine should have been the very first to be admitted to NATO, even out of turn. Well, as for what's happening there, I think you know without me telling you. And regarding the claim that Europe is drawing Moldova, Ukraine, I don't know who else, Armenia, other countries, into its orbit, it's once again an attempt to devalue the independence and sovereignty of other states. We've heard all this before, as if we're so lacking in independence that for the 5th year now we've been taking on giant Russia. By the way, we're actually concerned that China is drawing the Russian Federation into its orbit and using it. In fact, if there were a medal or an order for NATO expansion, Putin would be a recipient of every class of that order. Because from my own personal perspective, absolutely no one else has contributed quite as much to the expansion of NATO as Vladimir Putin has. Since 1999, a total of 16 different nations have officially joined the NATO alliance. At that time, there were 16 members in the North Atlantic Alliance. Now there are 32. The number has doubled. And as for those who want to join, I think there are even more now because of a stupid, aggressive neighbor. And not just neighbors, I think even more than that. So Putin deserves all the medals for NATO's expansion. Exactly, posthumously, I hope someone will help make that happen soon. Children in Belgorod will be taught how to find mines and hide from rockets using money from Putin's foundation. This is a very telling piece of news. I couldn't just ignore it. So, the Presidential Grants Foundation has allocated more than 2 million rubles for a project to teach Belgorod school children the skills needed to live in a border region. The implementation of the program will be handled by the Brotherhood of Orthodox Pathfinders, who will begin teaching children how to behave in emergency situations. They will teach the children how to pack an emergency bag, navigate using a map and compass, and show them what mines look like, as well as explain the rules for what to do if they find one. The Brotherhood of Orthodox Pathfinders is something like scouts from the Russian Orthodox Church. So, these are scouts from the Russian Orthodox Church, and you need to not only be able to light a campfire, pray for Putin, and write a denunciation against your friend. Actually, with the money that has already been spent on this war, Putin could have paid for surgeries for all the children in Russia who need them. He could have built hundreds of children's hospitals, new schools, and kindergartens. He could have made hundreds of thousands of children happy. Instead, children will be taught how not to step on a mine. And by the way, Putin has already killed the parents of hundreds of thousands of these children in this senseless war. You really have to have a special talent for that, to inherit a country with colossal resources, the largest country by territory with nuclear weapons, and in a quarter of a century, flush it all down the toilet and bring his country to the very edge of the abyss. Even if you tried, you couldn't mess things up this badly. But he managed to do it. Well, friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, subscribe to this channel, and don't forget. And let's help our artillerymen. We have just a little bit left to finish raising funds for them. The link to donate is in the description of this video. Have a peaceful day, everyone, and glory to Ukraine.